Hi there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Today's episode is going to be a little different, not in context, but in style. And a large part of that reason for that is I just felt I needed to sit down and perhaps just have a conversation. And I recognize a conversation with just me, myself, and I isn't a conversation, but when I record these episodes, it really is. I feel as if I'm having a conversation with um, any one of my listeners. But today's topic, the title of today's episode is Get Out of the Boat and Dive Beneath the Surface. Why Curiosity is Necessary for Healing Relationships. And this came about after several weeks of meeting with clients, as well as interactions within the support groups that I run and have online through Facebook. And this keeps coming up in a variety of different ways and forms, and my reply and answer all across the board is always the same. And so I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit today. Before we get started, I do have a couple of quotes I wanted to share. Both of these are by Dr. Gabor Mate. The first one is, a diagnosis may be helpful as a descriptor, but never an explanation. And the second is, safety isn't the lack of threat. Safety is the presence of connection. So I want you to picture, if you will, a lake with a duck on the water of the lake. And I know when I generally see a duck on the water, I see this really beautiful animal that is just kind of floating along the surface, just taking in life and enjoying life, right? Not a lot of effort. Things are just there kind of floating along. But what we're not seeing beneath the surface, right, is all the paddling that's happening to move this duck from one point A to point B. While there are times, I'm sure it's riding a current of sorts, but not all the time. And so I want you to kind of keep that in mind as we talk over the topic today. One of the, well, several of the questions that I get often is things such as, she's so angry. I don't know why she's so angry. She's choosing to be mean and nasty, or he's choosing to be mean and nasty. You know, gosh, she's just so independent. I never had to. She doesn't need me. So, and she's been that way since she was a kid. And so, I really spent the majority of my time dealing with my other children who did need me. And I want to offer a couple of stories and scenarios for your consideration. As I often talk about on this podcast, I mean, this is my podcast, and it is about my experiences. I've had a few people as of late who've been very unhappy with me because I am not impartial, is what I was described as but this is, after all, my podcast, and it comes from my perspective and my experiences. So, my father was was and still is, to a certain degree, a very angry man. I remember looking at photos from when, when I was young, a young kid, photos with him in the photo, and he never smiled. As a matter of fact, he generally had a frown on his face of some sort. He looked mad and pissed off with the world. And that's kind of sort of how he presented himself to the world. I can say that through work, when he was interacting, because I had the opportunity as a child to see him in his place of employment and things like that. And I can say that he was, people loved him, and he would generally smile and laugh and, was respectful and didn't have that frown on his face all the time. And, but at home and in the comfort of being around people he knew that knew him, he was angry. He'd fly off the handle in half a nanosecond, and just angry, angry, angry. And for the longest time, I kind of wondered if it had something to do with me, because that's what kids do. Kids internalize things, right? They're like, well, they can't see that it might be an issue with the parent themselves when we are children. And so we internalize it to be something about us. I think, who is it? I think mm, Gabor Mate talks about it, as well as Sven Erlandson with the Badass Counseling. Both of them say that children are the classic narcissist, right? Because they make it all about them, but they make it about them because they don't have the capacity to cognitively think and process through things and rationalize and all the things that we do as adults. So, anyway, for the longest time, I just had this dad that was so angry, right? He never smiled, but I always felt loved and cared for by him, but I knew he was volatile. And it wasn't until probably, I think it was about now 2 years ago. So I'm in my mid 50s. 2 years ago, that I had a conversation with my aunt, one of my dad's sisters. And she proceeded to tell me what their childhood was like growing up. My father never talked about his childhood, ever. I did know from my mom that he left home at a very young age, his early teen years, because things, quote unquote, things at home weren't well, end quote. And, but that's all I knew. I didn't know any details. I didn't know anything. Um, and in this conversation with my aunt, I learned that they suffered horrendous abuse at the hands of their father, my grandfather. And it wasn't always the physical abuse against them, but against their mother. And that my father spent a good number of his years, his childhood years, his adolescent years, saving his mother and his sisters from the wrath of his father. Now, I don't know about you, but that would cause me to be some kind of angry, especially when you're young and you're not able to process and recognize all the intricacies of an adult relationship. And this is what I'm talking about when I say dig beneath the surface. The behaviors that you are seeing from your adult children, there are reasons for those behaviors. They do not come out of the blue. Now, whether the reason for those behaviors are because of something you did or did not do, maybe not. Maybe it's something, I don't know, maybe they're dealing with having being bullied at school or things along those lines. But their ability to then, if you take a scenario like that, their ability to come home and be able to share that with you and feel safe and nurtured through that experience is what will make or break a, you know, how they react and respond to that and how they internalize it. So that's one example, right? My dad was, I mean, he spent most of his life fighting, and he continues that today. He doesn't, he never physically abused me or anyone, I never saw him physically abuse, my mother or a wife or anything like that. But he was angry, and he had every right to be angry. No one saw him, heard him, or validated him as a child. And I think this is the first time I've become emotional over telling that story, because I think of that little boy who was doing whatever he could to figure out how to survive. Let me give you another scenario. I have a person in my life who I've known for almost 30, well, yeah, about 30 years now. And people would see him today and think, oh, he's nothing but a drunk. And what they don't know is his history, his story. He grew up in a home that was pretty volatile as well. Lots of verbal stuff going on in the home. And his big brother, who was his best pal and his best bud and all of that, and his person he went to when things got rough for him, right? His big brother committed suicide when this person that I know was a he was either a preteen or had just entered his teen years. Think about that, right? Think about where he was in the world when his brother was no longer there. His confidant, his best pal is gone. His mother's grieving, his father's checked out. And so here is this kid completely alone in the world, wondering what to make of it. So, of course, we don't, especially with men, we don't encourage grieving and crying and processing grief. So it's suck it up, get on with life. We got to move on. We can't sit and quote unquote dwell in this. We have to keep on keeping on. So all that stuff gets shoved down and gets shoved down and gets shoved down and gets shoved down. And so he starts drinking. And then he starts having relationship issues. And then he starts having relation issues with his kids. And then he gets into car accidents. And then his health takes a nosedive and he starts having seizures. And so then they rip his driver's license from him. And all of this time, there's no one for him to talk to. There's no one to see or hear or validate his pain. And so he just keeps shoving stuff and shoving it and shoving it and shoving it and drinking and drinking and drinking because, let's drink so I don't have to feel all of this pain. And today, He's about my age, and he drinks from the time he wakes up till the time he goes to bed. And there is moments when a conversation can be had with him and his pain does begin to move to the surface, and then he'll immediately shut it down and talk about, I need to go get a drink. Again, reason for the pain, we got to get beneath the surface, right? But if you were to see him out and about in town, you'd look at him and say, wow, man, he's sure screwed up his life. He ain't nothing but a drunk. And that's what we do in this society. We judge people by first appearance instead of getting beneath the surface. Let me give you another example. Um, I have a friend who had an occasion um, to be in conversation with her boss at work, and this person is, has always been, the super employee, right? Attentive and willing to jump in and willing to do the things, and it's never been a problem. It's never been written up for anything along those lines. And in the middle of a conversation, and at a time in this person's life when her personal life was in complete and utter chaos, she was having to navigate some things that she had never navigated before, things along those lines, and was just in basically a kind of a panic mode, right, in her personal life. And so she was in a meeting with her boss, and um, was asked a question about, I don't know, finding a solution or having an answer to a problem or what have you. And her boss asked her about that, and her response was, I don't, I don't know. And her boss raised their voice to her and said, and called her adversarial, that she was being adversarial because she couldn't come up with an answer. And instead of taking the time for that boss to say, hey, this isn't like you. Is there something going on? Is there, this isn't, this isn't like you. And I'm concerned. Instead of that, the boss jumped right into calling her, said that she was being adversarial. And that absolutely broke her. Again, she wasn't seen, heard, or validated for things that were going on beneath the surface. And not that it was her boss's job to fix things for her or to dive into her business, her personal business, but a simple comment about, hey, this isn't like you. You don't normally respond this way. Are you okay? That alone could have made all the difference if her boss had just taken a minute to get beneath the surface, right? Another example I will give you is one from, I see this happen with so many people that I know, and including myself. Um, and that is especially for girls, and I can only speak because I am a female. Um, but those daughters who are quote unquote super independent, and parents say, I don't need to worry about her because she can take care of herself, when I need to take care of this other sibling because there's utter chaos going on over here, you know, doing all the things, acting out and what have you. I lived this, And I am here to tell you there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens behind the scenes, that is happening behind the scenes in scenarios like this. Children do not become hyper independent just because it seems like a good idea. There's a reason why they become hyper independent. Can be a variety of different reasons. Could be that, they see that all this chaos over on the other, with another sibling or siblings or things like that, and they're like, man, I don't want to, I don't want to get on mom or dad's bad side, so I'm just going to sit over here and be the good girl, right? And I'm just going to go fix my lunch. I'm not going to ask for anybody to fix my lunch. I'm just going to go do it so I don't upset mom or dad. Or it could be, I know that my sibling has medical issues, and they need my parent more than I do, and so I'm going to go over here and take care of myself. And this kind of narrative starts in the subconscious mind of kids from a very young age. I happen to think that mine started from the moment my sister came home from the hospital, and I was 3.5. And that's when I began to become this super hyper independent little girl. And then that turned into this super independent woman. And what people see is, man, she can totally take care of herself. She doesn't need anybody. And so then she walks through life looking at all the other people who are in need, and she thinks, why doesn't anybody care enough about me to want to be there to help me? There's always something happening beneath the surface. Whether we've had to be independent because our parents have checked out and, they're alcoholics or drug users, and we've had to take care of the family and had to be independent. I've got a friend of mine that is like that, right? And super independent today. And it makes it really hard for people like us, like her, all these other adult children, adult daughters, especially. Again, because I can speak to that. It makes it really hard for us to reach out and ask for help because no one's ever been there just to offer it up. And generally, when we do ask for help, we've been told no because there's, again, the parents are having to help the other kid or the other sibling or what have you in the family. And again, I see this all the time, all the time. And it is unbelievably devastating for the adult child. Unbelievably devastating. It makes us feel we're not worthy of love and belonging. I happen to have two daughters who have mother-in-laws who have significant health challenges. And so they are very present with their mother-in-laws. And even though we're reconciled and we have a good relationships today, there are still moments that I feel like, from my perspective, that they're like, "Oh, mom's good. Mom can take care of herself. She doesn't need anything. But my mother-in-law over here is having this health concern or that health concern, and I need to be more focused on her." Right? And so we have to, again, understand that there's what you're seeing on the surface of anything is not what is beneath. If you are in a boat on a lake and you dive into the water, what are you seeing? You're seeing a whole other world beneath the surface of that water. We humans are the exact same way. Our behaviors are on the surface. They are results of what is happening within. So I am asking you to develop your curiosity muscles and be curious about what is happening beneath the scene, beneath the surface, not the scene, beneath the surface for your estranged adult child. What could they be what could they not be telling you? Could they be feeling they're not worthy enough? Could there be shame that they're not wanting to share something with you because they feel shameful about it? Could there be hurt that you're not aware of? There's a whole host of things that happen. We human beings are so multi-layered that if you look at the surface, you're not getting the full picture. You're not seeing the full human being. And all of these quote unquote good traits. She's so independent. I am here to tell you those are cover ups for pain and hurt that you're not seeing. And if we can get curious to go to just wonder, I wonder, could there be something else that I am not seeing that is going on with her or with him? Human beings want to be seen, heard, and validated. And if they don't feel safe enough, emotionally safe enough to do so, they won't share. And what is that quote again by Dr. Gabor Mate that I shared earlier? Safety isn't the lack of threat. Safety is the presence of connection. If we want to be connected with our kids, we have to make it safe for them to come to us and say, this is hurting me, and I need you to know about it. And we need to not defend, and we need not to make excuses or any of those things. And I recognize it's hard to do that as a parent unless you've done your own work, because there's a little kid inside of you that has also been hurt. And I guarantee you, you have a multitude of coping mechanisms that are hiding the pain that was never seen, heard, or validated within you. And until that can be done, it will be next to impossible for you to do that for your children. So I'm asking you, on behalf of your children, on behalf of your inner little girl or little boy, to please find a way to get curious and brave enough to dive in so you can find out what's beneath the surface. This brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent and that you are able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement and reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, perhaps entertaining becoming a guest on our show, or following us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, The Estranged Heart. As a reminder, there is an online support group on Facebook. If you are a estranged mom who identifies as being spiritual and approaches estrangement with a sense of curiosity rather than blame and judgment, and desire to do inner self-work and reflection, please seek us out. We can be found at facebook.com/estranged mothers support group. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out to me via email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com.